passion and pageantry of college football lives here. This is the Paul Finebaum Show, Hour 1 podcast.
This might be college football heaven.
A new week is upon us. It is President's Day, but we've decided to honor presidents by working. Isn't that what presidents are supposed to be doing? Good afternoon and welcome in. We have a lot to recap and a lot to get to on this national holiday. Let's get started right now. And in case you missed this was monster news yesterday from Columbia, one of the bigger shockers of the year. The home streak is over. It's been in existence for 5 years. I mean, just simply unbelievable. A team that Tennessee beat 2 weeks ago, a 29-point loss for the Gamecocks, largest since 2008. 71-game home streak is gone. The 19 rebounding differential, the worst for Dawn Staley's team since 19. So what happened? We'll talk about that later with someone who covered the game. Meanwhile, Michaela, she was here just a week and a half ago. She's done it again. Come on, girl. 55 points. This was pretty stunning to watch, and some of the highlights as she just keeps it going. Remember, she had a 50-plus game a few weeks ago in Gainesville. She hit 3 free throws to send it into overtime, and she is the talk of college basketball. Look at these last 5 games. 55, 13, 22, 16, and 53. She needs to quit playing those Mississippi teams. How about the game of the century on Saturday in Tuscaloosa? It never happened for the Tide. They never led in the game. That's the first time that's happened under Nate Oates. Everybody was there, and everybody walked away saying the same thing. Auburn's the best team in the country. But first, what is going on in college football? Another scoop by Ross Dellenger. SEC Big Ten building momentum to further expand the CFP, 14 or 16. They will meet in New Orleans later this week, and leave it to Ross Dellenger to get down there just a day or two early to make sure the restaurants are ready for all the officials. Ross, thanks for the time. Appreciate it very, very much. So what do we know right now, just hours, if not days away from this monumental meeting? Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Paul. Big meeting Wednesday in New Orleans, like you said. Big Ten ADs, SEC ADs, each of the conference's staff members. They'll all meet here. It's their second time. You know, they've had this joint meeting in the last 5 months, and this will probably build on the last one they had, which was in Nashville in October. And there is, as you mentioned there, my story from today. There's momentum from each league into expanding the college football playoff and completely altering the format in giving multiple automatic qualifiers to a single conference. You know, four AQs potentially. This is a potential proposal. There's a few of them out there, but 4 AQs each to the Big Ten and SEC, 2 each to the ACC and Big 12, 1 group of 5 AQ, and then 1 at large, which would be for Notre Dame if they finish high enough in the rankings. So that's kind of like the 14-team model of what's being discussed right now. It's kind of a similar model, Paul, last spring during CFP negotiations over revenue distribution. It was proposed by the Big Ten then. This one now we're seeing some things building from both leagues, Big Ten and SEC. The SEC over the last few weeks has discussed this expanded playoff, and what this expanded playoff in this new format with the AQs and the multiple guaranteed spots, Paul, what this would do for the SEC is probably lead them to move to a 9-game conference schedule, right? Because the league has been split on playing a 9th SEC game. They play 8 now, and the league's been split for 2 reasons. So they want more money from ESPN, number one, but number 2, they don't want to suffer another loss and thus cost themselves a playoff trip. Well, if they're guaranteed certain playoff spots, right, that wouldn't be the case. So I think you would see there would be a ripple effect in this. So you'd have the AQs the new CFP format, which would lead potentially to the 9-game SEC schedule. And then if you have that, Paul, it leads you to the scheduling agreement with the Big Ten, where in SEC Big Ten schools will play annually every year. Basically, an SEC school will have one Big Ten opponent. They'll kind of rotate, and they'll play that. The Big Ten already plays nine conference games, Paul, so the SEC really needs to move to 9 in order to have this scheduling agreement locked up. So that's kind of the dominoes. I would expect all that to be a big conversation this week. And then next week in Dallas, Paul, the CFP commissioners meet then.
So, Ross, let me go over a couple of these things. The 9 games, that's been on the board for years. It has been tabled. That would go into effect concurrent with this new agreement beginning in 26. Is that your understanding?
That would be my understanding. We're not completely positive on that, right? And nobody's really commented on that. But everything lines up, Paul, to do all of this starting at 26, because that's the year, that's the new agreement with the CFP when the new 6-year extension starts and when the SEC and Big Ten control the format, control the governance of the CFP. You know, they control all these decisions. So everything kind of lines up to start that year. The playoff format, the scheduling agreement with the Big Ten potentially, in the 9th league game. You might have a phase-in to the Big Ten scheduling agreement. You might have a little bit of a phase-in because obviously schools have games scheduled, right, on their schedule. They already have previous non-conference games scheduled. So some of the schedules have to be altered a little bit. But my understanding is that likely that a lot of this would probably begin in 26, including potentially 9 games.
Now, on the Big Ten SEC, explain that in more detail. Is that every school at some point, or is that an every year annual situation we're talking about?
Yeah, no, so it would be multiple games, presumably, and again, this is not fully baked, the agreement, but they've certainly been working on it the last few months. But I think you'll see multiple games played every year between the SEC and the Big Ten. So take an SEC schedule, Paul. You would have not under all these ideas and concepts that we're talking about. You'd have an SEC school play 9 conference games. Did they play 1 game against the Big Ten? Home or away, it would probably rotate, right, every year. Then they would probably play 2 games against an FCS or G5. But those schools, I think there's 4 of them, Paul, that play every year, an ACC rival at the end of the year. You would think those games would stay. Ending Florida State and ending, South Carolina, Clemson is kind of a non-starter in those states. So those schools, Paul, would potentially play 9 conference games, 1 against the Big Ten, 1 against ACC rival, and then 1 FCS or G5. Already, you see, like Florida, for instance, this year playing 2P4 games. Right? They played Miami, and then of course every year they play Florida State. So you still have some of that now. So there will be a little inequality in the schedule, but we don't exactly know the details of all this, and I think they'll probably get ironed out over the next, this is a huge meeting this week, Wednesday.
And as far as the AQs, what do you know about that? Because this is not being well received by many in college football, that the Big Ten and the SEC would have X number of automatic qualifiers.
Yeah, it's not at all. Obviously, it's an inequality type of inequitable, you might call it, format, because you got 2 leagues that get 4 AQs each, and then 2 power leagues that get 2. And so I think there is a backlash, not only from the Big 12 and ACC. I think you see a lot of people around college football that don't necessarily like this idea. When you crunch the numbers, though, Paul, you get, from the last 11 years or so, when you crunch the numbers of how many conference teams or how many teams per conference are inside, say, the top 14 at the end of the year, you end up getting about that, right? The SEC and Big Ten average about 4 to 4.5 teams per year in the top 14. If you look at the last 11 years, I did some numbers crunching. And then the ACC and Big 12 both average about 2 each in the top 14. And in the G5, about once every 3 years, they'll have somebody in the top 14. In Notre Dame, it's once every other year they would be in the top 14. So that's just some data, and that's probably what the SEC and Big Ten are using in order to draft this AQ format. The big question, Paul, and I know I've been on your show talking about this part before, is how does a league determine who their 4 or 2 AQs are? And that's the fascinating part of all this.
Incredible. What a meeting this is going to be. Ross, many, many thanks. We'll be watching your reporting very carefully from the Big Easy. Ross Dellenger starting it off for us here on a Monday, President's Day. Your phone calls, your reaction to all of that, and the weekend straight around the corner.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
We're back. Peter Radikus will join us talking about Auburn, and Alexa Philippou covered the South Carolina game yesterday. Speaking of, how about this? Hey, Paul, in the past week, South Carolina women's basketball had their 57-game streak ended by Texas and their 71-game home streak stopped by UConn. How about that? Right after we had remember who was the Bama fan the other day who said Stacy declared his love for the South Carolina program? How about Vic Schaefer making some noise, a lot of noise out in Austin? Let's get to the calls here and start with Swamp Dog.
Hello, Mr. Paul. Thank you so much for taking my call today.
Swamp.
And I'm just calling today to thank you and all of your producers for making it possible for me to have a conversation with I-Man. And I did. We talked Friday. And let me tell you, for that man to take the time out of his day, going through everything that he's going through, and dealing with, to talk to somebody that he's never even met, me, And we talked. I mean, that tells you about that man's character and that he possesses. He's a great guy. But we talked for over an hour. And, I mean, it was like somebody I had known my whole life, Everything, there was no awkward moments or, didn't know what to say or anything. We just went on and on and on. And, we talked about music, which that's really what I wanted to talk to him about mostly. College football, college coaches, high school football. We went all the way down to high school football stuff. And the Paul Finebaum show itself. We talked about one caller. I ain't going to mention his name. You might know who that is. But and it was just so good. And I can't believe that he thought enough of me to actually reach out and contact me dealing with everything that he's dealing with. And I just want to thank you and your producer, anybody that had a hand in making that possible. I really appreciate it. And I think we both enjoyed our conversation. The only reason we had to quit talking is because I had to go to the bathroom. I had to get up and go. We would have talked for 2 or 3 more hours, it seemed,
Well, Dog, I'm really happy about that. And I don't need to repeat what so many have said, but this show really is amazing. When not the show, but the family around the show. Is very inspirational to all of us who are on this side. You be well. You take care of yourself. Judge John on this President's Day.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for taking my call. I needed to tell you a couple other instances where I made mistakes. The first one was a thing that happened about 1960. I was playing football for Livingston Academy against Carthage. And I was on the bench at the time. And a boy named Larry Dudney had intercepted a pass near the end zone and was fixing to run about 98 yards without being touched. And I come out off of the bench, 150 pounds soaking wet, without a helmet, and tackled him. And of course, they gave him a touchdown. The worst part about it was my my girlfriend and wife-to-be was sitting up in the stands, and another player's mother said, well, that's the only way John could ever get up in the newspaper. So obviously that was a bad moment, a bad mistake. The other time I can recall was when I was about 15, and my daddy was a Presbyterian preacher, and he preached long sermons. Well, the problem was us kids, there's 8 of us, had picked strawberries and made enough money to buy a 17-inch black and white Admiral TV. And on that TV on Sunday at 12 o'clock, the Redskins had their kickoff. Well, the reason I wanted to watch the Redskins game was that Joe Walton, my cousin, was playing for the Redskins. He was starting as a tight end and as a linebacker. That's hardly ever done. And so anyway, I counseled with my daddy that he was preaching us so long that we wasn't able to get to watch the kickoff. Well, that didn't do any good. And so my brother and I thought up an idea to put a big Ben alarm clock behind the pulpit, wind it tight, and set it for 12 o'clock. Well, we got to thinking that it might go off during a prayer, and we didn't want that to happen. But luckily, it went off right in the middle of his sermon. Well, he cast his eye back there at me. He knew I was the mean son that had done such a thing. And he preached on about 20 minutes. And so I headed for the house just as quick as the sermon was over. And he came in a few minutes later, and he was peeling off his belt and give me the last good belt whipping I believe I ever had. And I deserved it. But those are 2 bad mistakes I made.
Well, Judge, I appreciate your honesty, and you be well. I think that was the last belt whipping I ever had. Bash is up next from Boulder on that wonderfully scary note. Bash, good afternoon.
Good afternoon and happy Monday, Bash Brother Paul. What's going on today?
We're doing great.
My man. Well, Paul, I got to own up to all the trash talk I said last week. The Auburn Tigers, like you said at the opening of the show, they proved they are the #1 team in the country, and Alabama got knocked around all the way to 4. But before I continue on that, Paul, I wanted to talk to you about something that someone brought up to your attention last week. Do you remember when a caller called in and said you could be making $500 million a year?
I did hear that, yes.
Now, Paul, I'm going to be honest with you, as a one Bash brother to another, I agree with that caller. You could have made $500 million a year before, and you still have the opportunity to do that now. But the reason you won't, Paul, is because you learned from your Bash Brothers mistakes this weekend. You don't gamble. Unlike one of your former agent's other clients, he was willing to go throughout that direction with his content and his program, if you know what I'm saying.
I do. Yeah, listen, I think the prospect of making that much money, those days are over for me. I'm going to try to make do on the pittance that we all make here on the show. But Bash, I was pretty disappointed in the way Alabama played the other day. I mean, I didn't much care who won, but I was outside of a couple of runs. I mean, it was a really pathetic performance.
Like you say, Paul, you live by the 3, you die by the 3. We only made 5 3-pointers the entire game. Mark Sears going 2 for 11 from himself definitely underperformed and proved on the other side.
I now know what Nate Oates has been upset about with Mark Sears.
Well, he only is upset with him when he takes those similar shots, Paul, and he misses them. It's honestly, I'm not comparing.
But it just
Mark
seemed like
to
his
Steph
concentration
Curry,
was.
But it's a very similar component.
I mean, it just didn't seem like he had his head in the game.
Well, I mean, he had a couple days to rest after recovering from going on the road to Texas. And this obviously being a very high-intensity game where College Game Day was at it, where everyone in the country was watching on ESPN. It's probably the biggest game Mark Sears has ever played in other than the Final Four game. What would you think, Paul?
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, but and by the way, I don't offer this to alibi anything. I mean, it was pathetic. But the fact that Alabama still scored that many points, shooting as poorly as they did, was pretty interesting. But they'll meet again. They'll meet again probably after that. And quite frankly, I think sometimes you put too much into a game that in the grand scheme of things is not going to matter, other than it was a tremendous exhibition and display. Thanks, Bash. Appreciate it. We head to the break right now. More of your phone calls coming up. More guests to come as we take this short break.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
We are back, and we check in with Trey up next. Hello, Trey.
Hey, Paul. Want to bring up one play during the game and then tell you where I think Nate Oates got outcoached. But, Paul, what a great atmosphere, and I appreciate game day being there. But, Paul, I wouldn't blame them if they never came back the way that student section acted and Nate Oates happened to get on the microphone and tell them to quit screaming and hollering what they was screaming. That was an embarrassment to the basketball team and the University of Alabama, and those students shouldn't be allowed to come to the next basketball game. I was embarrassed as an Alabama fan, Paul. But, at one point in the game was 84-87 with like 2:20 left.
Right.
Alabama had two free throws and the ball. There was a flagrant foul. They get one free throw out of it. Auburn goes down and gets fouled and makes their two free throws. So we're looking at 7 or 8 points different there, Paul. And Alabama is a great, great basketball team, but Auburn is better. They have the better player, and Bruce Pearl outcoached Nate Oates, and he did it by running Alabama off that three-point line or contesting every three-point shot except for the 5 they made. I went back and watched it. The 5 they made were not contested. So he did a great job, and he just decided to play straight up man-to-man. They didn't switch, and he put that game. He made that a 2-point contest, knowing that he had the better player in the paint, and nobody could stop Broome. And if Broome don't win the MVP with the schedule they have played, there's something wrong with college basketball, Paul. But I appreciate you taking my call, but that was my take on the weekend. And again, I'm ashamed of the student section, Paul. Thank you for taking.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Nate got on the PA and was pretty irritated. Let's check out Richard up next. Hey, Richard.
Yeah, I just want to say, Chad Baker the national media treats him like he's the greatest player ever, and he's not. He's a passionate player for Auburn. We're the best team in the nation by far, and the flagrant fouls and stuff like that, Pat Adams is getting ridiculous. He needs to get fired from his job, and I just want to make that.
Hold on. Who needs to get fired, Richard?
Pat Adams. He's the worst ref in the SEC. They treat him like
I have to agree with. I don't know. I mean, those referees drove me batty at the end of the game. I mean, at some point, get control of yourselves. Quit showing off for TV. And do your job.
Yeah, they love to control, and it's inconsistent. You'll get slaps that don't get called, and then light touches to the wrist, and it is a flagrant or just a shooting foul in general.
Good analysis. Hey, thank you very much. Let's continue with Matt, who is up next. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Paul, how you doing? I wanted to talk about Texas A&M and their basketball game they had against Arkansas with their new coach.
Yeah.
Came up from Kentucky. I love the way my team has been playing. I think they have the makings, like I told you, to go really far in the tournament and possibly win the whole thing. I love how our coach has really put together a really strong program. When he first got there, it was a total wreck. It was a disaster. and 6 years later he's turned around his program into a power contender in the SEC where they can make it to the SEC tournament and win and go really far in the tournament and probably win a championship. I wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think Buzz is one of the best coaches around, and I like what he's doing. And that was a huge win the other night over an ascending Arkansas team. John is up next in Arizona. Hello, John.
Hey, Paul, how you doing today?
We are doing great. Thank you.
Good. Hey, love to see that the Big Ten and the SEC are getting together, and definitely love to see both conferences playing 9 games within the conference. But my question would be, at this point, with the CFP possibly expanding, what exactly is the job of the CFP? I mean, the UP was fine for many years, other than like the 2012 Alabama Notre Dame game. They did a pretty good job.
I'll tell you what's happened to the CFP, and when this contract runs out, which will be it's in the final year, the Big Ten and the SEC are going to dictate everything, and like it or not, and that's the way it is. So they're basically going in saying, we need more games, more teams. We want automatic qualifiers, and the SEC will play an additional conference championship, an additional SEC game, because they'll be guaranteed 4 teams. I don't know many people outside of the SEC and the Big Ten that really think this is a good idea. I don't know how many fans that think it's a good idea, but this is essentially 2 superpowers taking over the sport and saying this is how we're going to do it, like it or get lost. Thank you very much for the call. Appreciate it. Let's check out Ken in Missouri. Hello, Ken.
Good afternoon, Paul. Hey, second-time caller. And I've got 2 questions. Wanted to ask what you think possibility of 4 number 1 seeds coming from the SEC. And then if Missouri would win out, could they possibly be one of them?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think anybody can win out. I don't think it's going to happen, and the reason I don't think it's going to happen is I think Duke is going to snare one of those number 1 seeds.
Okay. All right.
I believe the ACC once had 3 number 1 seeds. I think that's the most we've ever seen. I mean, it is important, although the number 1 seeds traditionally, I think only one time, I don't know, about 8 or 9 years ago, or maybe it was 10 years ago or whatever. We've only had one, I think it was longer actually. We had one tournament one year where all 4 number 1s made it to the Final Four, but that is the only time. The NCAA is famous for upsets, and number 1 seeds get knocked out pretty regularly.
Sure, I agree. But I'd love to see four SEC teams as number 1s.
Yeah, I don't know what. I'm late to the party here, but I would bet heavily against it. That's not a knock; it's just a reality check. Thank you for the call. Let's continue with more. Carlos in Miami is up next. Carlos, you there?
Oh, hey there, Paul. How's it going?
We are doing great, thank you.
Good. First-time caller here. I just wanted to ask your opinion on the state of college football with the NIL deals going on, and how do you think it affects the state of college football moving forward?
I think the state of college football is in dire shape right now. I think it has completely gotten away from the people who run it. Maybe that's one reason why you see the 2 super conferences trying to take back the power. But the people that run the sport, which essentially are the leaders of all the conferences plus a number of other smaller conferences, have done a pretty poor job.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not too optimistic about the state of college football at the moment, with money basically running everything.
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous turnoff, as we talk about here often. I think there's a disconnect. I think the average fan feels left out when he sees his or her favorite player making $3 million a year and then heisting the school the next year to retain him. Hey, thank you very much for the call. Why don't we take a short break? A long way to go here on a holiday. We are coming right back.
You're listening to the Paul Finebaum Show podcast.
Back, and Adrian is up next.
Hey, Paul. I'm calling about the reporting from Ross, which was excellent. And I actually was kind of looking at the data in the actual article. And my one question, though, is it sort of feels like maybe the inmates are running the asylum, because I don't see how how the SEC is processing and appropriately considering the downside of putting 9 conference games, because we're cannibalizing ourselves badly as it stands. And I don't think we're really considering just how much that extra game of self-destruction is going to impact the teams, not just in terms of the win-loss record, if that continues to be disproportionately weighted, but just in terms of injuries, in terms of player health, in terms of just getting to the end of the season with the same team intact that you started with.
Yeah, I think, and I don't know this, but I think it had a lot to do with alignment with the Big Ten, that if the SEC and the Big Ten are going to go at this as equal partners, then the SEC needs to do the same thing as the Big Ten, because the Big Ten is not coming back to the pack, and that's always been the one thing the Big Ten people have pointed at the SEC, that you only play 8 games, we play 9. Now listen, you and I both know
look at Indiana's 9-game schedule.
This is not an equal situation, but yeah, but I think I also believe that the elite schools in the SEC have always wanted to go to 9, and the bottom dwellers have been keeping them from it. And the biggest surprise of all is that Nick Saban, as early as 2010, told me we have to go to 9 games. And then his final year at Alabama, he decided he didn't like it any longer.
Because he realized what that actually meant.
He realized who his permanent opponents were going to be.
Right. 100%. Okay. I mean, yeah, like when I hear all this and I realize that essentially, yes, we're turning into the NFL that is being run by 2 conferences. And honestly, I think the ACC and the Big 12 are getting off easier because they've got these guaranteed games when their conferences don't really have much of a difficulty in terms of a path to get a spot on their own.
I also believe there's a television component here, and
for sure.
ESPN has always wanted 9 games, and I don't know this because I am a lowly employee, but I'm assuming that they are going to now pay for it as well.
Sounds like a plan. All right, cool.
Good deal. Thank you. I mean, this is ground shaking, and I know it doesn't sound on a Monday holiday maybe as important as it really is, but what Ross Dellenger and what Adrian was talking about there is very significant. It's a seismic shift in where we are versus where we're going, both as a CFP and as the SEC. Let's check out Brubs in Philadelphia. Hey, Brubs.
Hey, Mr. Paul. How you doing?
We are doing great. Thank you.
That's great. Well, it's been a long since I called in. You know, when I was calling in before, I was on paternity leave, but now I had to go back to my job, you know, all that. But my question for you, Mr. Paul, is that me and my buddies are planning to go to an SEC game next year, and we were just wondering, we can't really decide which one, and we were wondering which one you would recommend, you know, a regular season game.
Well, yeah, well, help me with this, because, I mean, I can give you 8 or 9 or 10. I don't want to overwhelm you. So you're in Philadelphia. Where's everybody else coming from?
Mainly Pennsylvania, you know, some from the middle part of Pennsylvania. We got a couple guys from Chicago, but mainly Philadelphia. Oh, one guy from West Virginia, too.
Okay. Well, I think the locale is more important than the actual game. What I mean by that is certain games are more intriguing, I believe, at specific sites. I'll give you 2 examples. Alabama LSU is better in Baton Rouge. Why? Because the atmosphere is a little more frenzy. Now, this year it was not, by the way. Auburn, Alabama, everybody thinks, oh, that's a great game. In Tuscaloosa, that game is not great. In Auburn, it is epic. Do I need to refer you to the last time they played down there? It came down to 4th and 31, and Alabama won on the final play. The time before that, Auburn was again a prohibitive underdog. The game went into 4 overtimes. The wildest game anyone has ever seen was 12 years ago, the famous Kick Six game. I don't need to describe to you what that's all about.
I remember that one, Mr. Paul.
So those are two examples. I think, this year the Alabama-Auburn game is in Auburn. That would be high on my list. Last year I would have recommended Texas at Texas A&M. I don't think it's quite as good. Maybe in Austin. I'm just going through my mind thinking of some of the other big games this year.
Me and my buddies went to the Texas-Mississippi State game last year. It was the Texas first,
Right.
game in the SEC. We had a hoop. We had a hoop, Mr. Paul.
Yeah.
What do you think? Knoxville or Georgia or Athens?
Well,
if you had to pick that.
you've hit me with two places that I love to go to, maybe more than any other. Athens. Clearly, there are two incredible games there this year that I would mark very high on my list. Number one, Alabama at Georgia. Number two, or 1A or 1B, Texas at Georgia. I would try to make it to either one of them. I think they'll be equally great. Athens is a hard town, though, to stay in, though. I might consider staying in Atlanta because even today, you probably could not find a hotel in Athens. The other one would be Knoxville. I'm trying to think who's in Knoxville this year. Georgia will be in Knoxville. That's always a great game there, too. So I don't know when that game is. I'll have to look it up. But I think another thing is that game is in September. Here we go. So that would be an early game if you wanted to go that early. I think that would be a fun place to go. Knoxville is also a gorgeous place to go in October because of the Smoky Mountains.
Oh.
So
I think it was actually a direct flight from Philadelphia to Knoxville too.
Listen, I spent 4 years of my life there, so I highly recommend Knoxville, Tennessee. Let's talk again on this.
Thank you for listening to the Best of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast. Watch the Paul Finebaum Show weekdays from 3 to 7 Eastern on the SEC Network. Plus, you can listen and watch on the ESPN app.